Hello there. Way back in the 1990s, I worked for a short spell in Saint Mungo's museum, which is a short distance away. And sometimes at lunchtime I would come over here to Glasgow Cathedral and go inside and sit for a while, just for a bit of peace and quiet. And I used to sit just inside this bit here. This is the Blackadder Aisle. It's a small projection on the southern side of the cathedral, and I think it was originally constructed with the hope of perhaps building something else above it and using this to support whatever was above it, but that never happened. The aisle is nevertheless still here, and I just, inside the walls are so thick that you simply can't hear the outside world, and I would just sit there luxuriating in absolute peace and quiet. I was going to say heaven there. That sounds a bit religious. I mean, I'm not a religious man, but there is a part of me that wonders if perhaps sitting in there was more to it than just me having a wee rest. You never really know. The ceiling bosses in Blackadder Aisle overhead, they're absolutely stunning. They're all kind of intricately shaped and what have you. There is one near the entrance to the aisle, if you look closely above you. It's painted and it has the image of a man lying on a cart, along with the words, "This is the Isle of Fergus." Fergus was a holy man, and it was his dying wish to be buried wherever God saw fit. And when he died, a priest from Curus on the banks of the River Forth took Fergus's body on a cart led by oxen. And that cart came to a halt in this area. The oxen just stopped here, and this was clearly, as far as Kentigern was concerned, where God saw fit, and the body of Fergus was interred here. Fergus's body may in fact lie under Blackadder Aisle. And Kentigern was so affected by the experience that he built a small church and Christian settlement right here on the site of what is now Glasgow Cathedral. And Kentigern, it later became a saint and affectionately known as Saint Mungo. And he was in effect the man who created Glasgow.
St Mungo's Christian settlement grew as the centuries went by. A cathedral was built, along with houses for the priests, and a castle the Bishop's Castle. Growth and development spread down the High Street. A college was built, and many buildings grew on the route between the cathedral and the River Clyde, where small shallow vessels unloaded their goods at high tide, food and drink from far-off places to be carried up the High Street and consumed.
This is Church Lane here, this cobbled avenue, and it leads... Stop squawking! Let's just do that again. Well, this is Church Lane here, a small, a narrow cobbled avenue leading towards a bridge called the Bridge of Sighs, which was constructed in 1833 to span a slightly deepish ravine through which ran the Molendinar Burn. And the purpose of this lane and the bridge was simply to take people from the area around the cathedral, which just sits there, over that ravine towards the small hill in which sat the burial ground called the Necropolis, the burial place of many of Glasgow's rich merchants. And as you go over the bridge today, you can still get a kind of good idea of the extent of that ravine, because it's way down there. There's quite a height involved, but it's now been culverted over and runs under Wishart Street. And Wishart Street got its name from Bishop Robert Wishart, a very big supporter of Sir William Wallace.
But where is the Molendinar Burn? Its existence was crucial to Glasgow's early beginnings. Does it still exist? It's time to find out. The Molendinar Burn ran from Frankfield Loch into Hogganfield Loch and flowed for around 2 or 3 miles before finding its way through Glasgow and into the River Clyde. Along the way it would have served any number of industries, mills and bleach works, like Hogganfield Bleach Works and Proven Mill. It does in fact still exist in places. On maps you can clearly see its course between Frankfield and Hogganfield Lochs. Its actual route from there towards the cathedral is a little more difficult to trace, and we have to use old maps to determine where it once flowed. The following maps date to 1892. Here we can see the course of the burn between those 2 lochs, a course that is clearly visible in a modern satellite image. To the west of Hogganfield Loch, we can again clearly see the route back in 1892, but today it is lost somewhere in the streets of Blackhill, although its name lives on in the area in Molendinar Park. Between Blackhill or Proven Mill and the cathedral, it is more difficult to see the route back in 1892, but if we zoom in on the area of Blackadder to the west of Alexandria Park, we start to see tantalising glimpses of the burn sitting just south of the Monklands Canal. But today, as a result of housing and industry construction, all trace in that area has gone.
You only have to look at the span of the bridge there to see just how deep this ravine was. And it's maybe an indication of just how substantial the Molendinar Burn was, at least at some stage in its life, while perhaps in later years it may have become a bit of a trickly burn thing, also a sewer outlet. I think this is an indication that at some point it could be a pretty fast flowing bit of water. And certainly there are some images of the Molendinar Burn in this area showing waterfalls and things. So I think perhaps, and maybe just after heavy rain, this could be a substantial waterway. And down in Wishart Street, just down below, you can actually still see little bits of rock that would form the sides of that ravine. I think in many ways this was a good spot to put down roots and to build your early Christian settlement. I mean, it was all kind of quite a scenic area with drinking water close at hand. You know, apart from the fact that this is where the oxen carrying Fergus's body stopped. But yeah, very scenic. You know, you've got this kind of deep gorge here with the Molendinar Burn flowing through it. You've got the small hill on which the Necropolis is on these days, but it wouldn't have been back then. It would have been just a nice hill. Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, if the Molendinar Burn would have been a source of drinking water, because it would have been used by any number of mills. I mean, you couldn't have your settlement down by the River Clyde, where the river there is tidal and as a consequence it's salty. You couldn't drink that. So perhaps this was a source of drinking water at some time. All that said, there is in fact a holy well very nearby at the top of what used to be Lady Well Street, and perhaps that was the source of drinking water for many hundreds of years, if not in fact thousands of years. The very name Holy Well perhaps links it with Mungo and the cathedral and that early Christian settlement. From the cathedral all the way down to the River Clyde, it is much easier to trace the course of the Molendinar Burn compared with the sections of it outside of the city. And that is simply by examining old maps, in particular one dated to 1778 by John MacArthur. Really good map that shows the exact course of the burn. Perhaps sometimes not always easy to determine where the burn flowed as far as the layout of the ground today, because things were very different in 1778 and Glasgow's changed very much with a lot of stuff now gone and the new stuff in its place. This, as I say, is the Lady Well, that holy well that probably existed for over 1,000 years or so. Might even have been a supply of drinking water for Saint Mungo himself. Who knows? But the course of the Molendinar Burn from Wishart Street beside the cathedral, it then ran down Ladywell Street, which used to be right there. And it would have made its way towards Duke Street. Ladywell Street is now gone and it's now part of Tennant's brewery yard. But there are some interesting photographs showing Ladywell Street. I mean, there are some images as well, some old kind of drawings and paintings make it look as if it was a little quaint hamlet with thatched cottages and narrow bendy lines and things. And who's to say, maybe it was a hamlet in its own right at one time, but in later years it became sort of industrial with bigger buildings. And one of the photos here will show you Ladywell Street during that industrial period. I think it dates to the 1960s, something like that. Pay particular attention to the gable end and the angle of that taller building's roof, because you'll see them both in this other image, which dates to 1967 by John R. Hume. You can see, as I say, the gable end, that kind of pointed roof. It's a similar sort of image, except on this occasion we're looking down or up the Molendinar Burn. And Ladywell Street in that photo is on the right hand side over the wall that you can see. Unfortunately, Ladywell Street and that bridge on that side of the burn was swept away in the late 60s, and as I say, it's now part of Tenant's Yard. When the Molendinar Burn reached Duke Street, it took a curious right-hand turn, then a left-hand turn over Duke Street, and it is right there that today we can see the only part of the Molendinar Burn that still exists in Glasgow city centre. Well, it is here in Duke Wynd, just off Duke Street, that we can still see a little bit of the Molendinar Burn. It's not the most scenic area in the world, but nevertheless that is the waterway that effectively gave birth to the city of Glasgow. And from here it makes its way towards the River Clyde. It kind of passes to the rear of what used to be the college gardens in the High Street, and you can see that in any number of old maps. And then it heads towards the Gallowgate, where it makes a little kind of bend around St Andrew's Church. You do wonder whether some of these deviations in course are natural, whether they were intentional and man-made. I mean, the burn did provide water for any number of mills, so it wouldn't be out with the bounds of possibility for little deviations to be put in place in order for the water to drive your mill. But nevertheless, as I say, it finds its way around St Andrew's Church and then heads for the River Clyde. And it's there that we can still see it emerging into the River Clyde.
That arch over there on the other side of the Clyde is where the Molendinar Burn flows into the River Clyde. The burn without which there would be no Glasgow today.